Mercedes Benz parts availability, part 2. Well, if you're joining us again and you're not new, welcome back to the greatest Mercedes Benz channel on YouTube. And if you're new to this channel, well, you're welcome to the greatest Mercedes Benz channel on YouTube. Okay. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't yet. Thank you so much. Okay, now let's get into this. Mercedes-Benz parts availability in our last video we discussed is not linear. That means that the older the car is, it doesn't necessarily mean that parts availability is scarier. And we're going to talk about some solutions now to the parts availability problem and some of the technical challenges that have to be overcome and why certain parts are, even though they're available, they might not be worth using. So the first area that we're going to talk about is interior parts, where scarcity is greatest. Interior parts are like, you almost always have to find used ones. It doesn't matter whether it's a dashboard for a 123 or a 108 or a 124, which Mercedes does have some new ones in inventory. You know, by the early 90s, the dashboard issue, the dashboard cracking issue was resolved, but the 123 series cars never benefited from this. Cars like the 124 and the 201 eventually benefited, but there's still slews of cars that have this issue, and cars like the 116 and the 108 don't stand a chance with the genuine Mercedes dashboard. Cars like the 113 and the 111 that used leather-wrapped dashboards, of course, have their own set of issues as well, but we'll get into that in another part of the video. I know all this part stuff is kind of boring, but one of the biggest problems with making interior parts is whether to 3D print them or injection mold them. Now, if you haven't checked out my buddy George Har's website, classictrimparts.com, you'll see that George has some really high quality replica Mercedes interior parts for like the 124 for cars like the 124 Cabriolet or the R129 SL. These are injection molded. And for an individual to come up with $80,000 or so to make an injection mold for an R129 is daunting, you know, especially because you don't know if you're going to sell $80,000 worth of inventory just to recoup the cost of the mold, let alone all the R&D costs for the mold that you have to go through. So this isn't exactly the easiest thing to do, but what we do know is that Mercedes does have a lot of these parts. Molds still available. They never really got rid of them. Now, one thing they said about the 123 dashboards was that the tooling was no longer available because it had been left outside to rust, but we don't know if that's true or not because there are a lot of rumors that get circulated through the Mercedes rumor mill. Now, some people have proposed the more common solution to injection molding, which is 3D printing, but so far I found that unless it's a really low stress assembly, as in it can't be a plastic screw you have to turn. It can't be a plastic molding that has to snap and unsnap repeatedly. And one thing for sure is it can't take mechanical pressure. 3D printing is a last resort when you really need the part. And you'd better print multiples because with materials quality and the complexities and nuances of 3D printing, we find that it's not quite yet fully developed. Now, another area that I find very promising is CNC machining. CNC machining can be used to build, create, develop all sorts of brackets. And we've used CNC machining to get around some major engineering problems when adapting, let's say, a set of a part from one engine to another, or an item that requires some modification, but where we don't want to take a brand new Mercedes part and modify it just in case it doesn't work. So CNC machining has been another alternative in this area, and that does hold a lot of promise. However, CNC machined parts are never built to the precision of the original. So once you start getting into complex brackets and other items, you really don't know if they're quite going to hold up as well. Now, one last alternative that I will say is some people have resorted to taking the product to China to get it manufactured there because upstart Chinese parts are less expensive. A good example is with wheels. Maxi Light took the concept of making an AMG-esque replica wheel to China and had them build a number of these wheels. Now, this isn't exactly a bad idea if you want a neat set of wheels for your 140 chassis car or something, but again, the quality is not going to be there, and that's one reason why I'm very gun shy about using Chinese parts, because I don't want to have to go back and fix something where the party who made the part has no ability or desire to reimburse me for the time I've wasted installing their crappy part in the first place. So this is a real issue if you're trying to deal with low quality Chinese parts. Now, a wheel, you can just unbolt the old wheel, throw it in the trash, or recycle it if it's even recyclable. I guess it is recyclable, and then put the new one on, and then that old wheel might go to make a Kia or something. But at the end of the day, the wheel is a pretty easy part to change. The problems become more evident when the bearing that is deep inside your gearbox decides to explode and ruin the gearbox because the Chinese factory that built it didn't even know where the bearing was going to be used or what kind of stresses it was going to have to endure. That doesn't mean that the original manufacturer didn't say, hey, we need this bearing to be able to tolerate this much heat and this much RPM. It just means the factory didn't really follow the guidelines or have adequate testing, which tends to be the issue with Chinese parts. Chinese parts, usually in the context of prototypes, are fine. It's when they start actually manufacturing the stuff that it turns out to be bad. Now, we find that this is also true with a lot of American-made replica parts from Mercedes as well. So if you're from the United States and you're into manufacturing, don't start wearing the superiority hat just yet. We find that consistently the quality, materials, and testing standards of parts made in the EU, whether it's Hungary, Germany, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, the UK, tend to still be higher than those made in the United States. And for good reason. It's because these items have to pass a thing called the TÜV inspection. And if you don't know what the TÜV is, well, you should, because it's a much more rigorous process. And it's why cars from Germany tend to have much more rust proofing, for example. Anyway, these are just some examples of how people deal with part shortages. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to prepare for parts obsolescence. So we'll talk about that next week. But in the meantime, please like, share, subscribe, tap the bell for notifications. And thank you for checking out our great, wonderful little Mercedes channel.